Well, we're back for today's breakfast bite, and of course, I'm joined once again by Pete Baker from Life Church Lancashire. Hi, Pete. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm very good. Yeah, thank you, Nathan. How are you?
Very well, thank you. It's great to see you again. We've been looking at like rooted last week that you were talking about. Really, really fascinating
Yeah,
subject. What have you got for us today, though?
yeah. Well, yeah. Continuing that theme. Rooted. We looked at the prayer from the book of Ephesians, Ephesians 3. This prayer about being rooted and established, allowing our roots to go down deep into the soil of God's marvelous love. Then we've looked at John 15, where Jesus talks about He is the vine and we are the branches, and rooting our lives in Him, planting our lives in Him. So I wanted to share I guess, an interesting experience I've had. I went on a spiritual retreat recently with a group of people, and we ended up in a place in Norwich. I've never been to Norwich before, and our retreat was in Norwich. And the person leading the retreat chose Norwich because of somebody called Julian of Norwich. Julian of Norwich lived in the 1300s, was actually a lady. So in the 1300s, the name Julian in England was a female name, and then the French influence made it a male name down the line. But so Julian of Norwich was a lady, and actually the first lady to ever have a book published in English. And so the oldest surviving book in the English language is written by this lady, Julian of Norwich, um, called Revelations of Divine Love. And she lived during the Black Death, lived during a time of real crises. You know, this Black Death was killing lots of the population. There was the Peasants' Revolt, loads of difficult things happening. And she lived at this time and feared death at this time, like lots of people. I think something like 1 in 2 people died of the Black Death, of the plague as we know it. And she survived. She survived the plague, and I almost believe God was giving her a second chance. And she had this famous phrase: "All will be well. All will be well. All manner of things will be well." And her revelation, this revelation of divine love, was that ultimately that God was love. This was her revelation during this time of great tragedy and death and persecution and fear. Her big revelation was love. And one of the reasons she was famous, so she's partly famous because she was the first person, the first woman um, to have a book published in the English language in recorded history, 1300s. But what I found fascinating, and we went to her house as part of this retreat, or not her house. She lived in the church, so she lived in what they called a cell in the church, and she was what was known as an anchoress or an anchorite. So a man was an anchorite and a woman was an anchoress, and these were people that, like Mary, who chose to sit at the feet of Jesus when Martha was busying in the kitchen. Jesus says that Mary chooses the most excellent way, or the better way, which is to sit at his feet and learn from him. And so Julian decided to live her life rooted or anchored, sitting at the feet of Jesus. And so the way that she practiced that as an anchoress was that she lived in this cell connected to the church, and the room wasn't a tiny room, but it wasn't a massive room. And essentially, she had 3 windows in her room. One window to the church, where she could receive communion and be part of the church community. One window to the outside world, where she could pray and she could see the nature, she could see creation, she could commune with God. And one window where somebody would bring her food every day and then take her chamber pot to clean it and then bring it back. But then, as well as people coming to feed her, a maid, she would also have people come in to ask her questions, to seek her wisdom, because she was spending all this time essentially on her own with God. Once a week, sharing communion with the church community, um, but then most of the time just on her own. You know, the maid would come and visit her every day with food. I don't know how often she would come, but she would come at least once a day. But most of the time, she's on her own talking to God, on her own praying for the people around her. And so people came all the time. And during this time as well, she wrote these words that became this book. later on. So really, I found it really challenging, really incredible. This idea of a life that's rooted, a life that's anchored in the things of God, a life that's rooted in prayer, a life that's rooted in the presence of God, practicing the presence of God. But also, then what came out of her was the wisdom of God, and her big revelation was this: God is love. So a lifetime of prayer, and a lifetime in the presence of God, and a lifetime of solitude. Her then revelation was God is love. Again, in this time of plague and death and national mourning and tragedy, her message was God is love. This is not God's punishment. Actually, God is love, and God wants to sustain us through all of this darkness with his light and with his love. So yeah, as we think about this rooted idea, and like I said, I've had this weekend on this retreat in Norwich, and the retreat wasn't specifically about Julian. It just was next to the church where she lived and where she's known for. I just found it interesting learning about this person. Somebody that we might not all know about from our different church traditions, but yeah, somebody that played a significant role in our UK Christian heritage, a bit of a hero of the faith, as we looked at earlier, a bit of a hero of the faith, and actually a bit of a national hero. Like I said, the first woman in our nation's history to have a book published in the common tongue in English. It's quite a remarkable thing. And this book's message was, God is love. So yeah, that's just my meanderings on Julian of Norwich. So if people are interested, research, look into it. You can still read the book that she wrote today, and lots of other books about her or inspired by her. Yeah, so there we go, Julian of Norwich.
Wow, fascinating. And it is really, really interesting what you're saying about her life, and it reminds me of a character actually in the Bible. I forget her name, but she came and met Jesus when he came, when his parents brought him to the temple. And she had been, if I recall correctly, something similar to Julian,
Yeah,
living
that's a
in the
good
actual
point. Yeah,
temple.
Anna.
Yes, that was it, Anna.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, she was like dedicated to the Lord. She lived in the
Yeah,
temple, and yeah, she was widowed. So she, as a young woman, she'd experienced lots of grief, like Julian, and dedicated her life to prayer and to time with God, and lived the rest of her days in the temple, longing to see the Lord's Messiah. And she does, Anna and Simeon, who we don't think knew each other, but they just at the same time they both got to meet Jesus as a child or as a baby. Yeah, no, so it's
yeah.
a really good point, because I'd never heard of an anchoress before, but it was a tradition. That probably lasted. I think it lasted until essentially Henry VIII, when he destroyed a lot of the churches in the UK in order to build his own church. He destroyed a lot of those traditions. So yeah, I don't think there's been an anchoress or an anchorite since the 1500s. I think I read.
Okay.
But yeah, I guess that mentality. Some people still live that mentality of almost like a nun or a monk, like someone devoted to the Lord and living a life of solitude. And but yeah, I think there's something of that image that really struck me, of being rooted in God, being anchored in God, making his presence my priority. So what Julian did is quite extreme, and I'm not suggesting anybody does that to that extent. But yeah, living a life with, like, we've got one eye, one window to the world, one window to our community, to serve our community, and one window to God, and so we look into God for our source of life. We look into the world, and we're looking to our community to serve the needs of our community. So yeah, there's something interesting there about Julian.
Yeah, no, really, really fascinating. Thank you so much. Don't think I've ever heard of anchoress or anchorite, but
No, I
it's
hadn't.
it's really amazing, and that does take a certain degree of dedication, which I think we can all learn from. Is that
Yeah,
being dedicated and making sure that maybe not going to quite those extremes, but
yeah.
certainly applying many of those principles of being dedicated to God to make sure that we are drawing our strength and our wisdom from Him alone, which is
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Wonderful.
Yeah, thanks so much, Pete. It's been a pleasure as
problem.
always. I'll see you again next week.
Thank you. Bless you. See you later.
Pure Media, the magazine, is hand perfected with some of the finest writers from around the world that we could find, and yes, Andy B too. New editions are released just for you on the first Friday of every month, from our family to your family. Pure Media, the magazine, is available now. Sign up for free at puremediafamily.com/magazine.